love, you're listening to the Died on Ashanta podcast. I'm a resilience strategist and migrant integration specialist who has spent the last 20 years traveling, working, and studying throughout the Caribbean, North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia. As a globetrotter, I quickly learned how to bounce back from crisis and how to thrive in new and strange places. I've used my training and experience to develop a resilience-based framework, and now I help others to get over the hurdles that come with living in a foreign country. Now on this podcast, I invite you to join me on this journey of living with simplicity, joy, and resiliency. From green smoothies to goal setting, we'll cover it all. We'll talk about all the things that help us to thrive through the storm. Welcome to the Died on Ashanta podcast. This is episode 16, and we are talking about forgive and fortress. Now, you're probably wondering, what on earth, Died on? What do you mean by fortress? That's not how it goes. Well, I want to invite you to take on a different perspective on forgiveness. And you may wonder, why am I talking about forgiveness? Well, when you enter into new spaces, you often encounter new types of offenses. You probably back home would have thought about all the things that, I will never tolerate this, or this will never happen to me. And you get into a new environment. It could be because of cultural differences, or simply because you are hanging with a new crowd, new people with new value systems, new worldviews. And suddenly they cross your path in ways that you've never dealt with before, and you probably never saw it coming. Or sometimes it might be people from your own culture that you encounter in a foreign country, and they just do things that you would have never expected. And what ends up happening is that you become hurt, you begin to distrust everyone, and eventually you're going to end up in a state of depression. And in one case, after a young lady her trust had been violated by new friends she had met. These are people from her own country, and they were in a new country together, and she thought these people really had her interest at heart, but instead they really broke her trust, and it led from that experience to her becoming really depressed, not trusting anyone, being really socially isolated. She wouldn't go out, she wouldn't hang out with people because she didn't know who to trust, and it affected her mental health for many years, and it really impacted her ability to function, to go after her goals, and to ever come back to who she had dreamed of being. And so that's why we want to talk about forgiveness today, because it's a real challenge to tackle these kinds of hurdles that come upon us, whether we're at home or abroad. But it's harder when you are in a space where you don't have a lot of friends, you don't have a lot of options, and you can just decide, I'm not going to trust anyone anymore. But then what many of us have been encouraged to do is to forgive and forget. And you may be surprised, but this idea of someone offending you and you just kind of wipe the slate clean, and you quickly reconcile and you move on as if nothing happened, that is not the best way to handle things. Forgiveness isn't reconciliation. Forgiveness isn't a fresh start. Forgiveness isn't restoration of things as if nothing went wrong. This is what we call toxic loyalty, where you keep wiping the slate clean for someone even when there is no change in their behavior, there is no remorse, no admission of responsibility or guilt. Forgiveness really is about releasing the bitterness, the anger, the fear, the hurt, and tending to your wounds so that you can heal from the unhealthy or negative experience. And in doing so, then you can look into yourself and study your own vulnerability and set up boundaries to protect yourself. And it is this protection part that brings in the fortress instead of the forget in the quote that I'm recommending today. Now, a lot of you probably grew up hearing things like, turn the other cheek when someone offends you, or forgive 70 times 7. Or you're told love covers a multitude of sin. But those same quotes come from the same source that would also tell you that when someone doesn't repent from the things that they've done, that they're going to face judgment, or that when someone doesn't receive you and treat you with kindness, hospitality, that you should shake the dust off your feet and leave them, not to give them your presence, not to hang around with them. It also talks about God meting out vengeance, taking out vengeance on those who are his adversaries. So it is very important for us to have a balanced view about forgiveness in our lives. So when you think about healthy forgiveness versus the toxic loyalty, we are thinking about safety. And how do you allow yourself to be safe when you are in a new place, new company, new friends, and you're trying to make sure that people will offend you, but how do you protect yourself from constantly being offended, or locking yourself away for fear of being offended? Well, there are certain things that apply whether you have offended someone or someone has offended you. When trust is broken, you have to start assessing your values. What values did that person have that caused them to treat you the way they did, or to disrespect you, or to break your trust in any way? If that person hasn't identified what values they had that caused them to do that, and then to accept responsibility for how they have harmed you, then nothing they say or do after that doesn't make any sense, because the action will be repeated. And consistent change behavior is the only proof you need of someone truly repenting or changing their ways. So they may tell you, I'm sorry, apologize many times, but if their behavior doesn't change on a consistent basis, then clearly they are not being genuine. So they first have to check themselves, become self-aware, take responsibility, and then change their behavior on a long-term basis. And that's true forgiveness. And in the same way, if you start to check your values to say, what about me that allowed this person to overstep my boundaries, or to treat me in a particular way? What did I do that made them have access to this, I guess, vulnerable part of me? And then taking responsibility for how you allowed someone to take step of you, and then deciding in what way am I going to change my behavior? What boundaries am I going to enforce? What consequences am I going to mete out to someone who disrespects me? And so that's the kind of process you go through: your values, taking responsibility, assessing your values, taking responsibility, and making consistent changes in your behavior. And that's the way you go about forgiving and setting up fortresses for your life. Now, a great place that I came across for learning about how to make these changes, and it wasn't the entire book, but I found the message on forgiveness, and how we interact with others, and when to say no, when it's no longer smart to make reconciliation, and sometimes you just need to change or terminate a relationship when you have been violated and there's no remorse or change in behavior. It really dealt with it well, and it's a book by Mark Manson. It's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, and a counterintuitive approach to living a good life. It's a really good book. It may rub some people the wrong side because of the excessive use of expletives, but you might find it an excellent read to go across. And of course, today's proverb comes to us from the African continent. It says, "He who forgives ends the argument." He who forgives ends the argument. And so when you let go of things and you decide that, this is not worth it, I'm not going to hold on to this pain, and bottom myself into a kind of emotional prison of fear of dealing with others, and you walk away from an unhealthy interaction and surround yourself with people who respect you and treat you kindly, then you would have ended that argument, because you won't be going back and forth with someone who disrespects you. So as you go out there and you try to get into your communities and get to know others, I strongly encourage you to try to forgive by letting go of certain people, and sometimes letting go of maybe weak boundaries that you had, and really enforcing a strong fortress to keep you safe so that you can thrive in your host community wherever you may be. I'd love to hear your feedback on this week's episode. Let me know what you think. Are you forgiving and forgetting, or are you forgiving and setting up fortresses? Until next time, have a great week. Thanks so much for listening, love. If you enjoyed this episode, head over to diedandashanta.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's message. Be sure to drop your email address so I can send you some helpful resources, updates, and the occasional music video that I may have on repeat. Make sure you subscribe and spread the love with someone you care about.